Mark Davis built Happy Mart from a single store into a nationwide chain. But as profits soar, customer complaints pile up. Worried about what's really happening in his stores, Mark does something desperate. He goes undercover as a regular customer. In disguise, Mark visits 5 stores in 5 days. But he's not prepared for what he discovers. When a tired cashier tells a customer, "This company used to care about people," Mark Davis had a good idea when he started Happy Mart. Shame he's forgotten where he came from. Mark stops cold. What started as a simple fact-finding mission becomes a journey that forces Mark to confront the truth about his company and himself. As he digs deeper, he uncovers a hidden connection that will change everything. Some secrets can remain buried only so long. Mark Davis stared out the window of his office on the top floor of the Happy Mart building. From up here, the city looked small, like a toy set, kind of like the toy sets they sold at his stores. Mark sighed and turned back to his desk. The papers in front of him showed bad news. Sales were down for the 3rd month in a row. Happy Mart wasn't so happy anymore. "Mr. Davis?" His assistant Jenny knocked on the door. "The board members are asking for those numbers." Mark nodded. "Tell them I'll have them soon." Jenny didn't leave. She stood in the doorway, playing with her pen. "Is everything okay, sir?" Mark wanted to say yes. He was the boss, after all, the CEO. The big guy who started Happy Mart 15 years ago with just one small store. Now they had over 200 stores across the country. He should be happy. But he wasn't. "Have you seen these customer reviews, Jenny?" Mark pushed his computer screen toward her. "Listen to this one. Happy Mart used to be my favorite store. Now the workers look miserable. The shelves are empty. And nobody helps me find anything." Jenny frowned. "That's just one person, sir." "No, it's not. There are hundreds like this." Mark scrolled down. "Here's another. The cashier looked like she hadn't slept in days. I felt bad for her." Mark stood up and paced around his big office. The walls were covered with awards and pictures of Happy Mart openings. In the old pictures, everyone was smiling. In the newer ones, not so much. "Something's wrong with my stores, Jenny. And sitting up here in my fancy office isn't helping me fix it." Jenny sat down in the chair across from his desk. "What are you thinking?" Mark stopped pacing. A crazy idea was forming in his head. "What if I went to see for myself?" "You visit stores all the time," Jenny said. "No, not like that." Mark shook his head. "When I visit as CEO, everyone puts on a show. The managers make sure everything looks perfect. Workers are told to smile and be on their best behavior. I never see the real store." "So, what's your plan?" Mark smiled for the first time that day. "I'm going undercover." Jenny's eyes got big. "You can't be serious." "I am." Mark was getting excited now. "I'll visit stores as a regular customer. No one will know I'm the boss. I'll see how things really are." "But sir, everyone knows what you look like. Your picture is in every break room." Mark walked to the small bathroom connected to his office. He looked in the mirror. A tall man with gray hair and a serious face looked back at him. He did look like a boss. "I'll change how I look," he said. "I could cut my hair, wear different clothes, maybe glasses." Jenny followed him to the bathroom door. "This is crazy, Mr. Davis." "Maybe," Mark agreed. "But something's wrong with Happy Mart, and I need to find out what. 5 stores in 5 days. That's my plan." Back at his desk, Mark pulled up a map on his computer. "I'll start with the store in Millfield, then go to Riverdale, then the city, store on 8th Street, the one in Pinewood, and finish at Oakdale." Jenny was writing it all down, even though she still looked worried. "When do you want to do this?" "Starting tomorrow," Mark said firmly. "Tomorrow?" Jenny almost dropped her pen. "What about your meetings? The board presentation? The new product launch? Cancel them all. Say I'm sick. Food poisoning or something." Jenny sighed. "The board won't be happy." "They're already not happy." Mark pointed to the sales reports. "But maybe after this, we can fix things." That night, Mark stood in his bathroom at home with a pair of scissors. His expensive haircut was soon on the floor. He looked different already with short hair. From his closet, he pulled out old jeans and t-shirts he hadn't worn in years. No more fancy suits. At the drugstore, he bought fake glasses with clear lenses and a baseball cap. Looking in the mirror at home, he barely recognized himself. Perfect. Mark packed a small bag with 5 days' worth of regular clothes. No one would guess he was worth millions. No one would know he was Mark Davis, CEO of Happy Mart. As he set his alarm for early the next morning, Mark felt nervous. What would he find in his stores? Would it be as bad as the reviews said? Part of him didn't want to know. It was easier to sit in his office and look at numbers on a page. But Mark knew in his heart that something was wrong with the company he built, and he needed to fix it. 5 stores, 5 days, he whispered to himself as he turned off the light. Time to see the truth. Mark woke up before his alarm the next morning. He felt like a kid on the first day of school. Nervous, but excited too. After a quick shower, he put on his disguise. Jeans, an old blue t-shirt, the fake glasses, and the baseball cap. One last look in the mirror confirmed it. No one would recognize him as the CEO of Happy Mart. The drive to Millfield took almost 2 hours. Mark usually had a driver take him everywhere, but today he drove his old car that mostly sat in the garage. As he got closer to the small town, his stomach twisted in knots. "This is just another store visit," he told himself. But it wasn't. This time, he wouldn't be greeted by nervous managers and workers put on their best behavior. This time, he would see the real Happy Mart. The store came into view as he drove down Main Street. Mark frowned immediately. The big Happy Mart sign had a burned-out letter AE, so it read Happy I Mart. Not a good start. The parking lot had trash blowing across it, and several shopping carts were tipped over. Mark parked his car and sat for a minute, gathering his courage. Then he walked toward the entrance, just another customer on a Tuesday morning. Inside, the store was quiet. Too quiet. Mark looked around, noticing things he never saw on his official visits. Empty shelves, dusty floors, a spill in aisle 3 that no one had cleaned up. Where were all the workers? Mark grabbed a small basket and put a few items in it. Bread, milk, some apples that didn't look very fresh. As he walked through the store, he saw only 2 employees. One was stocking shelves so slowly it looked like he might fall asleep. The other was talking on her phone by the back door. When Mark reached the checkout area, he found a long line at the only open register. People were sighing and checking their watches. The line barely moved. When it was finally Mark's turn, he got a good look at the cashier. Her name tag said Betty. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back tight. She looked tired. So tired. "Find everything okay?" Betty asked without looking up. "Yes, thank you," Mark said. He noticed Betty's hands had a slight shake as she scanned his items. "Paper or plastic?" she asked in a flat voice. "Paper, please." Mark wanted to keep her talking. "Busy day?" Betty finally looked at him. Her eyes were dull. "Every day is busy. When they only have one cashier working." Mark nodded, trying to look like a regular customer just making conversation. "Have you worked at Happy Mart long?" Betty sighed as she put his milk in the bag. "Too long," she said. 10 years, and not a single raise in the last 3. Mark felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Could that be true? No raise. In 3 years. Is that normal? He asked carefully. Betty snorted. Around here it is. They keep cutting our hours too. I used to work 40 hours a week. Now I'm lucky if I get 30. Can't pay my bills with 30 hours. A customer behind. Mark made an impatient noise. Betty lowered her voice. Sorry. Shouldn't complain to customers. That'll be $12.87. Mark handed her a $20 bill. No, it's okay. I'm interested. Why do they cut your hours? Store manager says it's to save money. Says orders come from up top. Betty handed him his change. We're down to half the staff we had 2 years ago. One person does the job of 3 now. Mark took his bag, feeling sick. That doesn't seem right. It's not, Betty agreed. This used to be a good place to work. The founder, Mr. Davis, he had good ideas. But now? She shrugged. Just another big company that doesn't care about its workers or customers. Mark walked away, his face burning with shame. Is that what people thought of him? Of his company? As he headed toward the exit, he heard a woman asking loudly, Is there anyone who can help me? I can't find the baby formula. Mark stopped and looked around. No employees were in sight. The woman had a crying baby in her arms and looked desperate. I've been waiting 15 minutes, she told Mark, thinking he worked there. My baby needs her formula. Mark knew they kept formula in a special section near the pharmacy. I think it's over this way, he said, leading her there even though he wasn't an employee. Sure enough, the formula was there, but it was locked in a case. A sign said, Please ask associate for assistance. Great, the woman sighed. Now I have to find someone to unlock it. Mark looked around again. Still no employees. The woman bounced her crying baby, looking close to tears herself. This is ridiculous, she said. I'm never shopping here again. Mark felt helpless. He wanted to tell her he was the CEO, that he could fix this. But what good would that do right now? This woman needed formula, not promises. Finally, after the woman called out several times, the employee who had been on her phone appeared, looking annoyed at being bothered. Mark walked to his car, his Happy Mart bag feeling heavy in his hand. His first store visit had shown him more than he wanted to. See? Betty's words echoed in his mind. Just another big company that doesn't care about its workers or customers. As he drove away, Mark couldn't stop thinking about Betty's shaking hands, the crying baby, the empty shelves, and the mess no one cleaned up. Was every store like this? He had 4 more to visit. 4 more chances to see what Happy Mart had become when he wasn't looking. Mark couldn't sleep that night in his hotel room. He kept seeing Betty's tired face and the frustrated mother with her crying baby. Was that what Happy Mart had become? A place where workers were unhappy and customers couldn't get help? After tossing and turning for hours, Mark sat up and turned on his laptop. It was almost midnight, but he needed answers. He logged into the company system using his special CEO password. The blue light from the screen lit up his worried face as he searched for Betty's employee file. There it was, Betty Johnson. Hired 10 years ago as a part-time cashier. Moved to full-time after 2 years. Good performance reviews every year. Mark scrolled down to the salary information and felt sick. Betty was right. Her last raise was 3 years ago. Despite her good reviews, her pay had stayed the same while her hours were cut. This isn't right, Mark whispered to the empty room. He looked up more information about the Millfield store. Sales were down 15% from last year. Customer complaints were up. The store manager, Ron Peters, had been moved there from another location. Last year, Mark picked up his phone and called the regional manager, Jim Thompson. Even though it was late, Jim answered right away when he saw it was Mark calling. "Mr. Davis? Is everything okay?" Jim sounded worried. Mark disguised his voice a little. "This is Mark from HR," he lied. "I'm working on a special project for Mr. Davis." "Oh," Jim sounded relieved. "What can I help you with?" "I'm looking into store policies. Can you tell me about how managers decide on worker hours and raises?" Jim laughed. "That's easy. We cut hours whenever possible. More profit that way." Mark frowned. "Even if it means not enough workers in the store?" "Look," Jim said, "the big boss only cares about numbers. If I can run a store with 10 people instead of 20, that's a win. Sure, customers might wait longer and workers have to hustle more, but the money looks good on paper." Mark's hand tightened around his phone. "What about raises?" "Freeze on those for the last 3 years, Jim said proudly. "My idea, actually. Saved the company millions. Workers complain, but where else are they gonna go in these small towns? They're stuck with us." Mark thanked him and hung up before he said something he'd regret. He sat in the dark hotel room, feeling worse than before. Jim Thompson thought he was doing what Mark wanted, cutting costs at any price, making workers suffer to save money. "Is that what I've become?" Mark asked himself. "A boss who only cares about money?" When the sun came up, Mark had barely slept, but he had a plan for his second store visit. This time, he would look even closer at prices, workers, and how customers were treated. The Riverdale store looked much better from the outside. It was in a newer building with a clean parking lot and a sign where all the letters worked. Mark felt a small bit of hope as he walked inside. The store was busy with morning shoppers. The shelves looked full, and Mark saw more workers here than at the Millfield store. Maybe things weren't so bad after all. Mark grabbed a cart and started, shopping for real this time. He needed to spend more time in the store to see how things worked. In the cereal aisle, he noticed something odd. The same box of Honey Loops was priced at $3.99 on the shelf. But just around the corner, in the breakfast food section, the exact same cereal was $4.59. And by the front display, it was $4.99. Mark checked other items. Many had different prices in different places. He put a box of Honey Loops in his cart and kept shopping. In the dairy section, a woman was looking for yogurt. "Excuse me," she said to a worker stocking milk. "The sign says these yogurts are on sale, but there aren't any left." The worker barely looked at her. "If we're out, we're out. Try back tomorrow." The woman looked upset. "But I came all the way here because of your ad." The worker shrugged and walked away. The woman stood there, then put back her other items and left the store empty-handed. Mark continued shopping, seeing more problems. A spill in aisle 5 that no one cleaned for over 20 minutes. A line of people at the customer service desk, with only one worker helping them. Shelves full of items in the wrong places. When Mark got to checkout, he chose a line with a young man named Tyler as the cashier. Tyler looked bored as he scanned items, not making eye contact with customers. "Find everything okay?" Tyler asked in a flat voice when it was Mark's turn. "Actually, I have a question," Mark said, pulling out the Honey Loops. "I found the same cereal for 3 different prices in your store. Which one is right?" Tyler looked at the cereal box and sighed. "Happens all the time. Management changes prices but doesn't update all the shelf tags. I guess whatever rings up is what you pay." Mark watched as Tyler scanned the cereal. It rang up at $4.99, the highest price. "That doesn't seem fair to customers," Mark said. Tyler shrugged. Take it up with management. Not my problem. Mark paid for his items, but stayed near the checkout area, pretending to organize his bags. He overheard a conversation between Tyler and another cashier during a quiet moment. "How was your break?" the other cashier asked. "What break?" Tyler replied. 10 minutes isn't a break. By the time I got to the back room and sat down, I had to come right back." "At least you got 10 minutes, the other cashier said. "I've been here since 8 a.m. with no break at all." Mark checked his watch. It was almost noon. That was 4 hours without a break. He walked outside and sat in his car, thinking about everything he'd seen. The Riverdale store looked better than Millfield, but it had its own problems. Wrong prices. Workers without proper breaks. Poor customer service. Mark pulled out his notebook and started writing things down. Workers not getting breaks. Different prices for same items. No one helping customers. Store looks good, but feels wrong. Mark thought about what Jim Thompson had said on the phone. The big boss only cares about numbers. Is that what his managers thought? That Mark only cared about money, not people? Mark started his car, feeling more determined than ever. He had 3 more stores to visit, 3 more chances to see what was really happening in his company. And with each store, the picture was getting clearer and more troubling. Happy Mart was broken. And somehow, Mark had let it happen. The next morning, Mark drove to his 3rd store. This one was in the middle of the city, surrounded by tall buildings and busy streets. As Mark pulled into the parking garage, he noticed something different right away. The Happy Mart sign was bright and clean. The parking area was well kept. Even the shopping carts were neatly lined up. "Maybe this one will be better," Mark said to himself. He needed some good news after the first 2 stores. Inside, Mark was surprised. The store was spotless. Workers in crisp blue Happy Mart shirts moved quickly through the aisles, helping customers and stocking shelves. The displays looked perfect, with neat rows of colorful fruits and vegetables in the produce section. Soft music played overhead, and the store smelled fresh and clean. Mark walked around in shock. This was what Happy Mart was supposed to be like. This was his dream when he started the company 15 years ago. A young worker approached him with a smile. "Can I help you find anything today, sir?" Mark almost forgot he was undercover. No thanks. Just looking around." "Let me know if you need anything," the worker said cheerfully, before moving on to help an older woman find the tea section. Mark continued through the store, amazed at what he saw. Every aisle was clean and fully stocked. Prices matched on shelves and displays. The bakery had fresh bread, and the deli counter had 5 workers serving customers. This was a completely different world from the Millfield and Riverdale stores. Mark decided to get a coffee at the small cafe inside the store. As he waited in line, he overheard 2 workers talking in the break room just behind the cafe wall. "Man, I'm tired," one said. "Been here since 5 a.m. setting up for this district manager visit." Mark's ears perked up. "District manager visit?" "Yeah," the other worker replied. "Crazy how everything changes when the big bosses come around. Double staff, extra cleaning, fresh everything. And tomorrow we'll be back to normal. Half the workers, twice the work." "At least we got free donuts today," the first worker laughed. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Mark felt his heart sink. This perfect store was all for show. It wasn't real. It was a performance put on for higher management, just like the stores did when Mark made his official CEO visits. Mark took his coffee and found a small table where he could watch the store. Now that he knew what was happening, he noticed other signs. Managers walking around nervously, checking watches. Workers who looked tired behind their smiles. A back room door that was quickly closed when a man in a suit walked by. After finishing his coffee, Mark got in the checkout line. His cashier's name tag read Maria. Unlike the others he'd met, she seemed genuinely friendly. "Did you find everything you needed today?" she asked with a real smile. "Yes, thanks," Mark replied. "Your store is very nice." "Thank you," Maria said, proudly. "We work hard to keep it that way." "You seem to enjoy your job," Mark commented. Maria nodded while scanning his items. "I do. Been here 5 years now." "That's great," Mark said. "Not many people stay at one job that long these days." "Well, we have a good boss," Maria explained. "Mr. Johnson, our store manager. He fights for us with the higher-ups." Mark was curious. "What do you mean, fights for you?" Maria lowered her voice a little. "He breaks the rules sometimes to make things better for us and the customers. Like, company policy says we only get one 15-minute break for an 8-hour shift. But Mr. Johnson makes sure we get 2 breaks plus lunch." "Isn't he worried about getting in trouble?" Mark asked. "He says some things are more important than rules," Maria shrugged. "And it works. We have the highest customer satisfaction scores in the district." As Mark paid for his items, he asked one more question. "Do you think the CEO knows what's happening in the stores?" Maria thought for a moment. "Honestly, I don't think so. If the CEO knew what was really happening, he'd fix things, but those rich guys never see how their decisions hurt real people. They just look at numbers on a page." Mark thanked her and walked out to his car, his mind spinning. This store looked perfect today because a district manager was visiting. The rest of the time, it probably had the same problems as the others. The only difference was a store manager who broke the rules to treat his workers better. And Maria thought if the CEO, if Mark, knew about the problems, he would fix them. But here he was, seeing everything, and he felt helpless. How had things gone so wrong without him noticing? In his car, Mark called Jenny at the main office. "How's it going?" she asked. "Not good," Mark admitted. "The stores are a mess. Workers are unhappy. Customers aren't getting help." "Are you coming back?" Jenny sounded hopeful. "Not yet," Mark said. "I have 2 more stores to visit." "The board is asking questions," Jenny warned. "They don't believe you have food poisoning." "Tell them whatever you need to," Mark said. "This is more important." As he drove away from the city store, Mark felt confused and angry. The perfect store was fake. The good manager had to break company rules to do the right thing. And workers like Maria thought the CEO didn't care about them. 2 more stores to go. Mark hoped they would show him something different. Something better. Mark's 4th store was in Pinewood, a part of town where many poor families lived. As he drove there the next morning, the neighborhoods got rougher. Old apartment buildings with peeling paint lined the streets. Kids played in small patches of dirt instead of green parks. Mark felt a knot in his stomach. Years ago, when he opened this store, he had promised it would bring good jobs and affordable food to an area that needed both. Had he kept that promise? As soon as the store came into view, Mark knew the answer. The large Happy Mart sign had several burned-out letters. The parking lot was cracked, with weeds growing through. A shopping cart lay on its side near the entrance, and no one had bothered to pick it up. "This is worse than Millfield," Mark muttered as he parked his car. The inside of the store made him feel even worse. The lights flickered overhead, making an annoying buzzing sound. The floor tiles were dirty and cracked in spots. Many shelves stood empty, with out-of-stock signs taped to them. Mark walked slowly through the aisles, his heart growing heavier with each step. This store was in a neighborhood where people really needed it. For many families, it might be the only place nearby to buy food. and it was in terrible shape. In the produce section, the fruits and vegetables looked old and wilted. A woman with 2 small children was picking through the apples, trying to find ones that weren't bruised. "Excuse me," Mark said to her. "Do they always have such poor produce here?" The woman looked up, surprised that a stranger was talking to her. "It's usually like this," she said with a tired voice, "but it's the only store I can walk to, and bus fare costs too much." Mark nodded, feeling ashamed. This woman had no choice but to shop here, and Happy Mart was letting her down. After picking up a few items, Mark headed to the checkout. There were only 2 lanes open, even though the store was fairly busy. He chose the shorter line, behind an older man who was counting out change to pay for his groceries. The cashier's name tag read David. He looked very young, maybe just out of high school. Dark circles hung under his eyes, and his hands moved slowly as he scanned items. When it was Mark's turn, he noticed David trying to stifle a yawn. "Long day?" Mark asked. David nodded. "Sorry about that. I worked the late shift at my other job last night." "You have 2 jobs?" "Yeah, this one and the gas station down the street," David explained. "My mom's sick, so I'm helping with bills." Mark felt a stab of guilt. "Is Happy Mart cutting your hours too?" David looked surprised at the question. "How did you know?" "They cut everyone's hours. I used to get 40 a week. Now I'm lucky to get 25. "That's not right," Mark said, forgetting for a moment that he was just supposed to be a customer. "It's the same everywhere," David said with a shrug. "Big companies only care about making money." The man behind Mark in line joined the conversation. "You got that right, son. Everything costs more, but you folks get paid less, don't you?" David nodded. The older man shook his head. "This company used to care about people. Mark Davis had a good idea when he started Happy Mart. Shame he's forgotten where he came from. Now he's just another rich guy who doesn't care about regular folks." Mark felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. He couldn't breathe. Is that what people thought of him? That he'd forgotten where he came from? David looked at the older customer and said quietly, "The company's falling apart. Nobody at the top cares about us or the customers anymore." Mark had paid for his items and walked to his car in a daze. Once inside, he put his head down on the steering wheel and did something he hadn't done in years. He cried. Tears ran down his face as he thought about what Happy Mart had become. A place with unhappy workers. A place that let down customers. A place that had forgotten its purpose. Mark had started Happy Mart after working in his uncle's small grocery store as a teenager. He had seen how a good store could be the heart of a community. His uncle knew everyone's name. He hired local people and paid them well. He kept prices fair and made sure food was fresh. When Mark opened the first Happy Mart, he wanted to bring that same feeling to a bigger store. "Happy workers make happy customers," was the company's first motto. What had happened to that dream? After a few minutes, Mark wiped his eyes and started the car. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Real determination. Not to make more money or open more stores, but to fix what was broken. He drove to his hotel and called Jenny. "I want all the information you can find about store managers," he told her, "especially anyone named Johnson, and get me the names of the regional managers who oversee Millfield, Riverdale, and Pinewood." "What's going on?" Jenny asked. "Are you coming back to the office?" "Not yet," Mark said. "I have one more store to visit tomorrow." "The board is really angry," Jenny warned. "They're talking about an emergency meeting." "Let them talk," Mark D. said. "This is more important." After hanging up, Mark sat on the edge of the hotel bed and thought about everything he'd seen. Workers without breaks. Managers who only cared about cutting costs. Customers who couldn't find help. And David, a young man working 2 jobs because Happy Mart wouldn't give him enough hours. Mark opened his laptop and started writing. He made a list of everything wrong with his stores. It was a long list. Then he made another list, things to fix. That list was even longer. As the night grew late, Mark kept working. For the first time in years, he felt connected to his company again. Not the company of spreadsheets and profit margins, but the company he had dreamed of building all those years ago. Tomorrow, he would visit his last store, and then he would go back to the main office and start fixing Happy Mart. No matter what the board said, no matter how hard it would be. Mark. Davis was going to remember where he came from. Mark woke up early the next morning. He hadn't slept much. His mind kept thinking about all the problems he'd seen in his stores. Part of him wanted to skip the last store visit and go straight back to the main office. He had seen enough to know things were bad, but something told him he needed to finish what he started. 5 stores in 5 days. 1 more to go. The last store was in Oakdale, a middle-class suburb with neat houses and small parks. As Mark drove there, he tried not to get his hopes up. The first 4 stores had all disappointed him in different ways. From the outside, the Oakdale store looked average. Not great, not terrible. The sign worked. The parking lot was mostly clean. There were a few shopping carts left in the wrong places, but not many. "Let's see what's inside," Mark said to himself as he walked through the sliding doors. The first thing Mark noticed was the smell of fresh bread. The bakery was right near the entrance, and a worker was putting out warm loaves. The worker smiled at customers and offered free samples. Mark walked through the produce section. The fruits and vegetables looked fresh. Not perfect like at the fake nice city store, but good. A worker was spraying the lettuce with water and arranging the display. In the cereal aisle, Mark checked the prices. They matched the signs. In the dairy section, the shelves were fully stocked. The floors were clean, though not spotless. Mark stood in the middle of the store, confused. This place wasn't perfect, but it was good. It felt like what Happy Mart was supposed to be. A worker approached him. "Can I help you find anything?" "No, I'm just looking around," Mark said. "Your store seems nice." The worker, whose name tag read Carlos, smiled. "Thanks, we try our best." "How long have you worked here?" Mark asked. "Almost 3 years," Carlos replied. "It's a good place to work." Mark almost dropped his shopping basket in surprise. "You like working here?" Carlos nodded. "Sure, the pay could always be better, but our manager treats us well. And we have good regular customers." He pointed to an older woman examining tomatoes. "Mrs. Wilson there comes in every Tuesday. Her husband died last year, and sometimes she just wants to talk. We make time for her." Mark watched as another worker stopped to chat with Mrs. Wilson. The worker didn't seem rushed or fake nice. She seemed to genuinely care. After Carlos moved on to help another customer, Mark continued through the store. Workers were helping people find items. A spill in aisle 6 was cleaned up right away. The checkout lines moved at a good pace. Mark felt a tiny spark of hope. This store was working the way it should. But why? What was different here? At checkout, Mark chose a line with a young woman cashier. Her name tag read Emma. She greeted him with a real smile, not a forced one. "Did you find everything you were looking for today?" Emma asked as she scanned his items. "Yes, thanks," Mark replied. "Your store seems to run well." Emma nodded proudly. "We have a great manager, Sarah Chen. She really cares about the store and all of us who work here. What makes her a good manager? Mark asked, genuinely curious. She listens to us, Emma said. If we have a problem, she fixes it. If a customer complains, she takes it seriously. And she stands up for us to higher management when they try to cut hours or change things that work. Mark thought about the other stores he'd visited. That sounds rare these days. It is, Emma agreed. My friend works at the Happy Mart in Riverdale. It's totally different there. But Sarah says our way is how all Happy Mart stores used to be. As Emma bagged his groceries, Mark asked, "Have you worked here long?" 2 years, Emma said. I'm in college, studying business management. Sarah's teaching me a lot about running a store the right way. Like what? Mark was intrigued. Emma's eyes lit up. Like how taking care of your workers means they take care of customers, and how sometimes spending a little more money now saves a lot more later. Oh, and the letter program is her best idea. Letter program? Mark had never heard of this. Emma leaned forward slightly. Sarah has us write letters about problems we see and ideas to fix them. She collects them and sends them directly to corporate headquarters. Do you think anyone reads those letters? Mark asked. Emma sighed. I doubt it. But Sarah says we need to try. She met him once, years ago, and says he was a good person who cared about people. Him? Mark asked. The CEO, Mark Davis. Sarah says he started Happy Mart with good ideas, but somewhere along the way, the company lost its heart. She thinks if he knew how bad things have gotten, he'd fix it. Mark felt a lump in his throat. So, you keep writing? Letters, even though no one might read them? We have to try, Emma shrugged. The company has a heart somewhere under all the corporate rules. We just need to help the boss remember what Happy Mart was supposed to be about. Mark paid for his groceries and walked to his car in a daze. His mind was spinning with everything he'd learned. 4 stores with problems. 1 store that worked well, and it worked because the manager, Sarah Chen, followed the original Happy Mart ideas, even when they went against current company policies. And those letters. Where were they going? Mark had never seen them. Who was stopping them from reaching him? Mark sat in his car, staring at the Oakdale store. He thought about Betty at the first store, with her shaking hands and no raise in 3 years. He thought about the pricing problems at Riverdale. He thought about the fake Perfect City store putting on a show for management visits. He thought about David at the Pinewood store, working 2 jobs because Happy Mart cut his hours. And he thought about Emma, writing letters to a CEO she believed would care if he only knew the truth. I do care, Mark whispered. And now I know. He started his car and pulled out his phone. It was time to call Jenny again. I need a favor, he told her. Look through all the mail that's come to my office in the last year. Look for letters from Sarah Chen or the Oakdale store. I've been sorting your mail for 5 years, Jenny said. I've never seen letters like that. Check anyway, Mark insisted, and find out who sorts the mail before it gets to you. Mark drove back to his hotel, packed his bags, and checked out. His undercover mission was over. He had seen what he needed to see. Now it was time to act. As he drove toward the company headquarters, Mark's mind went back to the beginning. To his uncle's small grocery store where he'd worked as a teenager. To the first Happy Mart he opened 15 years ago. To the promise he'd made to himself that he would build a company that cared about people, not just profits. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that promise. But it wasn't too late to remember it. It wasn't too late to fix what was broken. Mark Davis was going back to being the boss. But this time, he would be the kind of boss his company needed. Mark arrived at the Happy Mart headquarters building at 5 a.m. The sun wasn't up yet, and the parking garage was empty except for a few cleaning crew cars. Mark parked in his usual spot marked CEO, but instead of going to the front entrance, he used his key card to enter through a side door. The building was quiet. No phones ringing, no people talking. Just the hum of air conditioning and the soft sound of a vacuum cleaner somewhere down the hall. Mark went straight to the mailroom on the first floor. He used his master key to unlock the door and turned on the lights. Rows of mail bins lined the walls. A large sorting table stood in the middle of the room. Mark had never been here before, even though this was his company. He looked at the bins and found one labeled Executive Correspondence. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes addressed to various company leaders. Mark dug through them but found nothing from Sarah Chen or the Oakdale store. Next, he checked a bin marked Customer Relations. These letters would eventually go to the customer service department on the third floor. Nothing from Oakdale there either. Then Mark noticed a small bin in the corner with a label that made his heart skip. Low priority. He walked over and looked inside. The bin was full of letters, many with Happy Mart Oakdale printed on the envelopes. "Found you," Mark whispered. He grabbed the bin and took it to his office on the top floor. The halls were still empty as he made his way through the building. In his office, Mark dumped the letters onto his desk and started opening them one by one. The first letter was from Emma, the cashier he'd met yesterday. She wrote about how the company's new cleaning supplies hurt her hands and suggested a different brand that worked just as well but was gentler. The second letter was from Carlos, the worker who had helped him in the store. He suggested a different way to arrange the produce section to reduce waste and make it easier for customers to find what they needed. Letter after letter contained good ideas from workers who cared about making the store better. Some pointed out problems, others offered solutions. All of them were addressed to Mark Davis, CEO, and all of them had ended up in the low-priority bin, never to reach him. Mark kept reading as the sky outside his window turned from black to purple to pink. By 7 a.m., he had gone through over 100 letters. He found a pattern. The workers believed in Happy Mart. They wanted it to succeed. But they also saw that things were going wrong. They wrote about managers who cut hours and didn't listen to workers. They wrote about stores that didn't have enough staff to help customers. They wrote about good ideas that were ignored because they might cost a little money up front. Mark was so focused on the letters that he didn't hear his office door open. "Mark?" Jenny's voice made him look up. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide with surprise. "What happened to you?" Mark realized he still looked like a regular customer in his jeans and baseball cap, not the CEO in a fancy suit. "A lot happened," Mark said. He gestured to the pile of letters. "Did you find any more of these?" Jenny walked to the desk and picked up one of the envelopes. "I checked like you asked. I've never seen these before. They never made it to my desk. Someone's been putting them in a low-priority bin in the mailroom," Mark said. "Probably. Hundreds of them over the years." "Who would do that?" Jenny asked. Mark had a pretty good idea. "Get me a meeting with all the top executives. Today, 9 a.m. "But you look..." Jenny gestured at his casual clothes. "Perfect," Mark finished for her. "I look exactly how I need to look today." Jenny nodded and left to set up the meeting. Mark continued reading letters. One from Sarah Chen caught his eye. She wrote about how her store was succeeding by following the original Happy Mart values, even though it sometimes meant breaking current company rules. "I believe if you knew what was happening in your stores, Mr. Davis, you would be as upset as I am," Sarah wrote. "The Happy Mart I joined 10 years ago cared about its workers and customers. We can be that company again." Mark felt a mix of sadness and hope. Sarah was right. They could be that company again, and he would make sure of it. At 9 a.m., Mark walked into the main conference room. 10 executives in expensive suits sat around the table, looking confused. They had been told the CEO called an emergency meeting, but the man who walked in looked like he had just come from shopping at one of their stores. "Who are you?" asked Tom Wilson, the chief operating officer. Mark took off his baseball cap and fake glasses. "I think you know who I am." Gasps filled the room as the executives recognized their boss. "Mark?" Tom stood up. "What is this?" Mark dropped a stack of letters on the conference table. "This is what's been happening while we've been sitting in our comfortable offices looking at profit reports." For the next 30 minutes, Mark told them everything he had seen at the 5 stores. He told them about Betty with no raise in 3 years. He told them about the pricing problems at Riverdale. He told them about the fake Perfect City store. He told them about David working 2 jobs. And he told them about Emma and Sarah Chen, still believing in what Happy Mart could be. "Our company is broken," Mark said, "and we broke it." Some executives looked ashamed. Others looked angry. Tom Wilson spoke up. "With all due respect, Mark, you don't understand what it takes to run a company this size. We have to cut costs to stay competitive. That's business." Mark shook his head. "No, that's bad business. We've been cutting the wrong costs. We've been hurting our workers and our customers to make our numbers look good on paper." He picked up one of the letters. "And someone has been making sure I didn't see messages like these from our stores. Who decided these letters were low priority?" The room went quiet. Then Robert Johnson, the vice president of operations, cleared his throat. "That was my decision," he admitted. "I thought they would distract you from the big picture." "The big picture?" Mark slammed his hand on the table. "These letters are the big picture. They're from the people who make our company work every day." Mark fired Robert on the spot. Then he fired 2 other executives who admitted they knew about the letters. Tom Wilson tried to argue that Mark was overreacting, so Mark fired him too. The remaining executives sat in shocked silence. "Things are going to change," Mark told them. "Starting today, we're going back to our original values. Happy workers make happy customers. Anyone who doesn't believe that can leave now." No one moved. "Good," Mark said. "Now, I need to make a phone call." He dialed the Oakdale store and asked for Sarah Chen. "Oakdale Happy Mart, this is Sarah Chen speaking. How can I help you?" "Hello, Sarah. This is Mark Davis, CEO of Happy Mart." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Is this a joke?" "No joke," Mark said. "I want to thank you for your letters. I finally read them." Another pause. "You read them? All of them?" "Every single one," Mark confirmed. "And I want to offer you a job at our main office as our new chief operating officer." This time the silence lasted so long that Mark thought the call had dropped. "Ms. Chen, are you there?" "Yes." Sarah's voice was quiet. "I'm just surprised. Very surprised." "I'd like to explain everything in person," Mark said. "But first, there's something else I need to do. Something important." After hanging up with Sarah, Mark called his driver. Instead of going home to rest, he asked to be taken to the Pinewood store, the rundown one in the poor neighborhood where he had met David, the tired cashier working 2 jobs. This time, Mark didn't wear his disguise. He wore his normal clothes and, most importantly, his CEO name tag. He wanted everyone to know exactly who he was. The store looked just as bad as it had 2 days ago. Broken sign, cracked parking lot, messy aisles. But this time, Mark wasn't here to observe. He was here to act. Mark walked straight to David's checkout line and got in line behind 2 other customers. When David looked up and saw who was standing there, his face went pale. "Mr. Davis," he whispered. Mark could see the fear in the young man's eyes. "I heard what you said about the company the other day," Mark said. David looked like he might faint. But then Mark smiled. "You were right. I needed to hear it. Thank you for your honesty." David's mouth opened, but no words came out. Other workers and customers had noticed who was in the store. They gathered around, whispering and pointing. Mark turned to address everyone. "I've been visiting stores undercover to see what's really happening at Happy Mart. What I found wasn't good, but that's going to change, starting today." He announced that Happy Mart would immediately raise wages for all workers. They would fix broken stores like this one. And most importantly, they would listen to workers and customers. "I promise to visit every single Happy Mart store in the next year," Mark said. "Not as a secret shopper, but as the CEO who wants to hear directly from you." As Mark turned to leave, David finally found his voice. "Why did you do it? Why go undercover?" Mark thought about Emma's words from the Oakdale store. He looked around at the workers and customers watching him. "I forgot something important," he said. "I forgot why I started this company. It wasn't about money or being the biggest. It was about building something good that helped people." Mark walked to the door, then turned back with a smile. "And by the way, David, you're getting a raise starting today, and all the hours you want." Back in his car, Mark looked at the long list of things to fix. The board of directors wouldn't be happy at first. Raising wages and fixing stores would cost money. Profits might go down for a while, but Mark didn't care. He had seen the real cost of focusing only on profits. Unhappy workers, angry customers, broken stores. That wasn't the company he wanted to lead. His phone rang. It was Jenny. "Sarah Chen accepted the job offer. She'll start next week." "Great," Mark said, "and set up visits to all our stores, starting with the ones I just saw. We have a lot of work to do." As his car pulled away from the Pinewood store, Mark felt both tired and energized. The past 5 days had changed everything. He had seen the eye-on truth about his company, and it had hurt. But now he had a chance to fix it. Mark Davis was the boss again. And this time, he would stay connected to what really mattered. The people who made Happy Mart work, one store at a time. 6 months passed. Happy Mart was changing. Mark and Sarah worked together every day to fix the company. They raised wages for all workers. They repaired broken stores. They created a new system where workers could share ideas directly with leadership. Every idea was read. The good ones were used. The board of directors wasn't happy at first. When Mark announced his plan, they complained loudly about costs. Profits would go down. Shareholders would be upset. "Let them be upset," Mark told the board. "We're doing the right thing." Some board members quit in protest. Mark didn't mind. He found new board members who believed in the original Happy Mart values. As Mark had predicted, profits did go down. At first, the stock price dropped. Financial news shows questioned his decisions, but then something surprising happened. Workers started staying at their jobs longer. Happy Mart didn't have to spend as much money training new people. Customers noticed the difference in the stores. They started coming back more often. Slowly, sales began to rise. Mark kept his promise to visit stores. Every week, he went to a different Happy Mart. But he didn't just walk around and leave. He worked in each store for a full day. Sometimes he stocked shelves. Sometimes he helped customers find items. Sometimes he worked the cash register. He always wore his CEO name tag. He wanted everyone to know who he was. And he wanted to know what it was really like to work in his stores. One Tuesday morning, 6 months after his undercover journey, Mark visited the Oakdale store. This was where he had met Emma, the cashier who believed the CEO would fix things if he only knew about them. Sarah Chen had left this store to work at the main office, but she had trained her assistant manager to take over. The store looked even better than Mark remembered. Clean floors, full shelves, happy workers, satisfied customers. Mark spent the morning helping in the produce section. He arranged apples and sprayed water on the lettuce. He helped an older woman find the perfect avocado. He cleaned up a spill without being asked. During his lunch break, Mark sat in the break room with the workers. They still seemed surprised to have the CEO eating sandwiches with them, but they were getting used to it. "How are things going?" Mark asked them. "Really going? Don't just tell me what I want to hear." The workers looked at each other. Then one spoke up. "It's better," she said. "Much better. We have enough people working now. We get our breaks. The new manager listens to us." Others nodded in agreement. One mentioned he had just bought his first house with his improved pay. Another said customers were nicer now because they got better service. After lunch, Mark moved to the front of the store to help with checkout. He saw Emma at Register 3 and went over to her. "Mind if I join you for a while?" he asked. Emma smiled. She was used to Mark's visits now. "Not at all, Mr. Davis." As they worked side by side, with Emma scanning items and Mark bagging them, she asked a question that caught him by surprise. "Can I ask you something that's been bothering me?" Mark nodded. "Of course." Emma looked a bit nervous, but continued. "That day, you came in as a customer. I felt like I knew you from somewhere. Had we met before?" Mark was about to answer when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was Jenny with an emergency at the main office. Something about a delivery problem affecting 20 stores. "I'm sorry," Mark said to Emma. "I have to take this. But I promise I'll tell you the whole story next time I'm here." Emma nodded, understanding that the CEO had important things to handle. Mark finished the call and had to leave right away. He said goodbye to Emma and the other workers, promising to return soon. As Mark drove back to the main office, he thought about Emma's question. Had they met before? The truth was, yes, they had, many years ago. But Emma didn't remember, and Mark hadn't told her yet. 20 years ago, Mark had been poor and struggling. He had just finished school and couldn't find a job. No one would hire him, except for one small grocery store in a neighborhood not far from where the Oakdale Happy Mart now stood. The owner of that store was a kind woman named Helen. Helen gave Mark his first real job when no one else would. And Helen had a young daughter, who sometimes played in the back room after school. That daughter was Emma. Mark learned everything about running a good store from Helen. How to treat workers with respect, how to serve customers well, how a store could be part of a community. But then a big chain store opened nearby. Helen's small store couldn't compete with their prices. After a year of struggling, Helen had to close the store. On the last day, Mark made a promise to her. Someday, he would start his own company. It would be big enough to compete with the chains, but it would have the heart of Helen's small store. That promise was why Mark started Happy Mart. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten his promise. He had become exactly like the big chain that put Helen out of business. Emma had no idea that she was part of Mark's story from the beginning. She didn't know that she had inspired him twice. First as a child in her mother's store, and then as a worker who still believed her CEO would do the right thing. And she didn't know the biggest secret of all. Mark had been searching for Helen for years. He wanted to tell her that her small store had inspired a whole company. He wanted to thank her for giving him a chance when no one else would. Mark looked in his rear-view mirror at the Happy Mart store growing smaller behind him. Soon, he would tell Emma everything. Soon, he would reveal the connection between them. But not today. Today, he had a company to rebuild, one store at a time. I hope you enjoyed the name tag, An Undercover Boss Story. Where are you listening from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this story about a CEO rediscovering his company's heart touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We post new heartwarming stories like this every week that remind us about what truly matters in life. Remember, small acts of kindness can make a big difference, just like Mark learned in our story. Sometimes all it takes is seeing the world through someone else's eyes to change everything. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to reconnect with what's important. Until next time, keep spreading kindness wherever you go.